To the pilot of a steamboat on the Mississippi River, Mark Twain was a term that meant that the water was 2 fathoms, or 12 feet deep. Mark Twain was also the name which Samuel Langhorne Clemens took to be his pen name, and wrote on his many works, including famous titles such as The Life on the Mississippi River, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Samuel Clemens also wrote The Prince and The Pauper, which is the subject of my ISU, and which in this presentation I am doing a literary analysis of. Born November 30th, 1835, in the town of Florida, Missouri, in the States, Samuel Clemens was the 6th of 7 children in the Clemenses family. The Clemenses moved to Hannibal, Missouri, when Sam was 4. This town was on the banks of the Mississippi River. The river and his adventures on it strongly influenced his writing later in life. His father died when Sam was 11, and life was difficult after this for Sam and his family. Sam started working at a local newspaper to earn some money. And as it turns out, this was the first of many jobs that Sam would have later in his life working for a newspaper. He would go on to be a printer and actually a reporter. In my opinion, his first job at the newspaper when he was 11 was very pivotal in his career, ultimately as a writer, because it started him from a very young age on the path of writing. And writing. He, of course, wrote The Prince and The Pauper, which is the book of my ISU, and the part of that book that I'm going to be analyzing is a transition from innocence to non-innocence of Edward. And in this media representation of the story, Prince Edward, up in the top right-hand corner, up in the Vale of Royalty, basically does not know what goes on beyond his royal realm. In the story, he switches places with a pauper, a young peasant boy, and ends up wandering the streets of London, beyond the Vale, as I've called it here. So he ends up experiencing all the stuff that I have on the left-hand side, not exactly guillotines, but the evils of humanity, the injustices of the law. In these experiences that he has, ultimately his perspective of society is changed. And this change in him ultimately makes him want to be a more merciful king and to amend the laws of the land. Some background of what was going on in England at the time of this story. Henry VIII, Edward's father actually, was king of England. He caused a great deal of trouble in the land, especially due to changing the country's official religion from Catholicism to Protestantism. This change, which was due to his own personal reasons, wanting to divorce his wife, caused just a lot of trouble for a lot of people. But he was okay with it, this King Henry. There was widespread unemployment, and about a third of the population lived in poverty. This certainly was not helped by the fact that many laws were in place to sort of regulate poverty. They were created in order to bring regulation and try to control things, but ultimately they just perpetuated the suffering of the people. So a couple examples of laws like that were that it was illegal for anyone to travel outside their home village if they were unemployed, which in a time when so many people were unemployed really is counterproductive, because of course they're going to be wanting to look for employment out in the world, but it was illegal for them to do that. It was also illegal to beg without what was called a begging license. And these licenses were very hard to come by. So basically, if you were unemployed, you could not go looking for work, and you could not beg. So there was not a whole lot of help for you. There was a lot of suffering going on in England, and Edward grew up unaware of this. During his time as a pauper, Edward witnessed the injustices of the law for the first time. So he went out and experienced just the suffering of the people. And some of the eye-opening experiences that he had are as follows. He was nearly executed for supposedly stealing something worth more than 13 pence a penny. That was what would now be considered a very petty crime, but actually he was almost executed for it. If that says anything about the severity of the laws in England at this time, there was actually over 200 crimes that you could commit that would result in execution or capital punishment. So, very harsh. He witnessed the public burning of 2 women, and at one point was thrown in jail without a trial. While there, he heard stories of other prisoners. One woman had stolen some cloth. One man had killed a deer in the King's Park. One youth had been accused of stealing a hawk. All were sentenced to death. Again, these were very new experiences for Edward because he was innocent of them beforehand. As a result of these experiences, Edward went through a change of perspective. Ultimately, he desired to amend the laws that he had seen and witnessed to be so harmful to the people, and he wanted to be merciful towards them as king later on. Edward was shocked that such terrible things as public burning of people should happen in Christian England, or in England. Aye, there's the shame of it. Not in heathenness, but Christian England. That's a quote from the Prince and the Pauper. After hearing the stories of his fellow prisoners during his time in prison, if I may clarify, he was furious over the inhumanities and wanted Hendon to break jail and fly with him to Westminster so that he could mount his throne and hold out his scepter in mercy over these unfortunate people and save their lives. So again, his change of perspective is that he went from seeing everything as just, oh, it's nice and in my little royal realm here, to going out, experiencing the terrible things that are going on, and now he really wants to help. Though their stories are entirely different, the protagonists in Hamlet, The Life of Pi, and The Prince and the Pauper all actually sort of share this similar experience of starting out in a state of innocence, going through some sort of realization of the evil in humanity, which ultimately brings about a change in that given protagonist's perspective of humanity, of life. In the case of Hamlet, Hamlet's life is thrown into chaos when his dad is murdered. A chain of bloody deaths and evil deeds follow as he tries to avenge his father. Basically, his life is all, it's good beforehand. And then, when his uncle kills his dad, everything is just thrown around. It's chaos. He's just finding out that humanity is capable of such evil, and it changes his perspective, firstly, of his uncle, because now he thinks he's a terrible person and wants to kill him, and secondly, because he blots out everything else that's going on, focuses on avenging his father. So that's Hamlet. In the case of Pi, Pi's life is shattered when his family is lost in the shipwreck. He is horrified by the evil done by the cook, and what that evil brought out of himself. In order to cope, he alters his perspective by seeing himself and others as wild animals. So again, Pi starts out as he's innocent of just the evil in humanity. He does not know to what extent people will go. When he's on the lifeboat and he sees the cook kill and eat the sailor and then actually kill his mom right in front of him, that just shakes his understanding and perception of humanity, and even more so when he himself, as a reaction to what he's seen, kills the cook. And his change of perspective, again, of seeing, just now knowing that people are capable of these things, takes him to the point where, in order to cope, he actually turns basically the people that he's been in contact with, the people that he's been around, views them as animals, because that's the only way he can deal with it. He sees their deeds as inhuman, more as animalistic. And of course, back to Edward, his experiences as a pauper lead him to try and amend the law of England. That's his change of perspective again. So, in conclusion, in the story of The Prince and the Pauper by Samuel Clemens, or aka Mark Twain, Edward goes through this experience, this realization of the evil in humanity during his time as a pauper. This brings about a change in perspective of his, and ultimately he desires to be merciful towards the people and to amend the laws of England. Thank you. There's some works cited.